This is a tutorial video on how to multiply a whole number and a fraction using a word problem. Well, the problem is Miss Jackson is making 7 chocolate cakes for a birthday party. Each cake uses 2/3 of a cup of sugar. How many cups of sugar will she use to make the cakes? Well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to identify the important information. Now, in the story problem, we're given each cake uses 2/3. That's the first piece of information we're going to box. The next thing we need to know, well, how many cakes is she going to make? She is going to make 7 chocolate cakes. So I'm going to draw a model first to represent 2/3. This represents the first cake that she is making. And in that cake, she will use 2/3 a cup of sugar. So I have shaded the model to represent 2/3. And then how do I write 2/3? I write 2/3 as 2 divided by 3. Now, this represents 1 cake, but Miss Jackson was making 7 cakes. So we're going to draw this model 7 times. 2, 3, 4, 6, or 5, 6 cakes. And now we have 7 cakes. And for each cake, I have shaded 2/3 to represent 2/3 of the cake will have sugar. Now, we're going to write this as a multiplication expression. Since I drew 7 cakes, that means I have 7 groups. Now, since each group is the same fraction, we can do 2/3 plus 2/3 plus 2/3 plus 2/3 plus 2/3 plus 2/3 plus 2/3. But that's a lot to add. So the shortcut when we add the same number every time is multiplication. So 7 groups of 2/3. Now, one thing we know about fractions is that they have a denominator of 1. So now we are going to multiply straight across. 7 times 2 equals 14, and 1 times 3 equals 3. So we should have 14/3. If I look back at my models and I count the pieces that were shaded, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. And each one of these is 1 out of 3. So, now, what kind of fraction is this one? This is the fraction that we do not want. It is called an improper. What makes it improper is that the numerator, 14, is greater than the denominator of 3. Now, we don't like this kind of fraction. So, what are we going to do? We're going to convert it to an equivalent fraction using a mixed number. And since fractions are nothing but division, we're going to divide 14 by 3. Now, I'm going to figure out how many times 3 divides into 14. To help me, I'm going to write my multiplication table on the side to where I come close to 14, but without going past it. So 3 times 1 is 3. 3 times 2 is 6. 3 times 3 equals 9. 3 times 4 equals 12. Now I see that 12 is close to 14, so I'm going to make one more of my 3's. 3 times 5 equals 15. Now, when I look at my multiplication, I notice that 12 is the closest product that can be subtracted from 14. So, how many wholes did I pull out of that? I pulled out 4 wholes. 4 goes on top. Multiply down. 4 times 3, we're going to subtract that 12. And we're going to do our subtraction. 4 minus 2 is 2. 1 minus 1 is 0. Now, since I have a remainder, that means I'm going to have a leftover fraction. The numerator will always be your remainder, 2, and the denominator never changes. We are still using thirds. So, how many cups of sugar did Miss Jackson use to make her 7 cakes? She used 4 whole cups and 2/3. And that is how you use a word problem to show multiplication of a whole number and a fraction.